Hello and welcome to June's recap of Scary Spooky Books. These are spoiler-free reviews of the 3 books that I read in June that are creepy, and honestly all of them were delightful. The first book is The Ravenous Dead by Darcy Coates. I have to say, I started reading this and I was like, I feel like I'm missing something. The way that it was written and the things that the characters were talking about, I was like, I feel like I missed a chapter somewhere. And it wasn't until I was 2 or 3 chapters in that I realized, oh, this is the second book in a series. So don't be like me and start with The Ravenous Dead. The first book in the series is called The Whispering Dead. I am going to go back and read that one just so I can kind of have a better understanding of the origin of the main character, Kira, and kind of how she got to where she was. So The Ravenous Dead begins with Kira. She's living in the groundskeeper's cottage in a cemetery in this small town next to the church where the pastor of the church lives as well. And he's hired her on because he has learned that she can speak with the dead. She can see the dead, and he wants to hire her to help her release any restless spirits so that they can move on to a better place. Not everybody knows that Kira has this ability, even her 2 closest friends, which she does eventually tell them. I don't feel like that's a spoiler because it's kind of obvious she's going to have to tell her friends what's going on in order for the story to move forward. One of the spirits that she encounters in the graveyard is one that has no face. And this spirit, he just stands there and stares out into the forest. And she's trying to figure out who he is, but she can't figure it out because his grave is unmarked. She then also encounters a darker, powerful spirit, more powerful and dark than anything that she thinks she's come across. And she's not totally sure because the other crazy thing about Kira is she has no memory of who she truly is. So the book follows her as she's trying to figure out who is this spirit. She learns of a serial killer that lived in the town years and years prior, and she thinks maybe this spirit could be a victim of that serial killer. And so her and her friends are trying to kind of figure out who this spirit is, how this serial killer is connected, who is this ravenous spirit in the woods. It was a good paced book. It was a pretty easy read. If you were a fan of the Fear Street books or Christopher Pike books back in the day, you will love this book. And honestly, anything written by Darcy Coates, you will love. It's got kind of the same Fear Street, Christopher Pike, R.L. Stine vibes, and I love it, but obviously more for adults and geared towards a little bit older group of people, but really good. I'm looking forward to, if there is a 3rd book, I want to read that one for sure. The next book I read was The Haunting of Maddie Clare by Simone St. James, and this was my first book by this author, and I really enjoyed it, so I actually picked up 2 more books by this author to read for July. I enjoyed this book so much. The Haunting of Maddie Clare takes place in 1920s England, and it follows Sarah Piper. And she gets hired on, she works with a temporary agency in England, and she gets hired on by a man named Alistair. He is a paranormal investigator and author. And he is hiring Sarah to go with him to this small town where a very vengeful spirit of a woman named Maddie Clare is haunting a barn there. And he's bringing Sarah along rather than his typical assistant, Matthew Ryder, because it's said that Maddie Clare hates men. And so Alistair is thinking, if I bring Sarah in, she can kind of help with the investigation, and maybe we'll get some more information about this spirit and why she's there, and hopefully maybe help to release her. So Alistair is going there really wanting to write a book on this and get as much information as he can about who was Maddie Clare in life. She was one of the house servants of a wealthy family that lived in that town, and she took her own life tragically in the barn. And there's a lot of mystery surrounding who Maddie Clare was. She kind of, around the age 11, 12, just showed up on the doorstep of this family, and she didn't speak to anybody, and it was clear she'd gone through a lot of trauma. So this story, I loved it. I loved the writing. I loved the pacing. It really helped to kind of set the scene. I like when writing doesn't delve too much into unnecessary details, but it's written just enough that you really could picture the scenes, you could picture the characters, you could picture what was happening, and I really loved it. but we get to learn a little bit about who was Maddie Clare, what exactly happened to her, why is she haunting this place. It was just a really good book. The dialogue was great, the story was great. It was a little bit of a mystery horror book, and there were also some spicy scenes, which I was not expecting, but I wasn't complaining about. And overall, just a really excellent book. And like I said, I'm looking forward to reading more from this author. And the third book that I read in June was The Witch of Tin Mountain by Paulette Kennedy. And this book was amazing, and I'm calling it now. It is going to become a movie. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but I will be shocked if this does not become a movie. The characters have rich personalities. There's so many layers to this. It's just, it's so good. And I don't even quite know how to explain it because I don't want to give away spoilers. But pretty much the book follows in 1931 Gracelyn, and it follows her and her family. Her family has lived in the mountains for generations, and people whisper that maybe they are witches because they do a lot of folk healing. And so the people from the town don't necessarily give them respect when they see them in the town, but of course they have no problem going up to the mountain to their cabin and getting these different cures and potions and things like that to help them with stuff. So this book, it has things about race and sexuality and family trauma and curses. It has magic. It has history. It's got so much, and it's so good. The book, each chapter, it will either be focusing on 1931 Gracelyn, and other chapters flash back to characters in 1831 and I think 1881. So there's kind of like different timelines going on, but it's not one of those stories where it's like kind of jarring or confusing because you're flip-flopping back and forth. It flows great. It's amazing. A word of caution though, there is some violence and like murder and sexual assault that occurs in the book, but I personally didn't think it was anything that was like too graphic and terrible. Like it wasn't very disturbing to read. But the story follows Gracelyn, and kind of what is going on with her in present day kind of reflects what happened to other women in her area in the past, as far as a preacher comes to town and he basically tries to turn the town against Gracelyn and this family. And why is he doing that? What is his reasoning? You discover that, and I don't want to tell you that. But this book, it was so good. My only complaint was that I felt like the end went a little too quickly. I was like, oh, okay. Like it felt a little too fast paced, like almost like if this was a movie, the climax scene at the end would have only lasted for like a few minutes, and you would have been like, well, I kind of wanted that to be a little bit more drawn out. That's my only critique that I have of this book, but that's very minimal because everything was so good. And honestly, I would love to read more about these characters and Gracelyn and kind of follow her along. And I just loved it. I can't even talk. I could talk all about it all day long, but I can't because I don't want to spoil anything for you. Anyway, that is my recap of the books that I read in the month of June. And a sneak peek of my first book for July is From Below by Darcy Coates. Gotta read some Darcy Coates. I was trying to kind of go for like a summary type book, and this takes place underwater, so which I have a fear of drowning. So this book, it's getting to me. I already started it, so technically I guess it's not. I'll be finishing it in July because it's a pretty thick book. Easy read, but pretty thick. Anyway, all right. Happy reading. Talk to you later. Bye.